You are listening to the K. I messed it up. It was bound to happen. Can we cut and start over, Jack? You are listening to KDUX Web Radio, broadcast live from Richland College in Dallas, Texas. We are the voice of Richland College. Views expressed on this show are Orlando's only, unless otherwise stated, and do not reflect the opinion of KDUX Web Radio, Richland College, Jeff Manzi, Kaylin Scoggins, Jack Fletcher, Kay Eggleston, and the DCCCD. All right, guys. Well, come back.
You broke your one episode streak of getting the disclaimer right.
Hey, that might be my longest streak yet. Here we are again, folks. Coming back at you, the Philanthropology Club. Am I right?
Sounds right.
We're getting a lot of philosophers on the radio show, not a lot of anthropologists, I've noticed.
I think there's 0.
Yeah, more like the anthropologists. They need to apologize. Anyhow, well, back in the saddle, folks. Few announcements before we get started and make introductions. The Philosophy Club meets every Tuesday from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in the Y parking lot. I'm joking. 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. in EO 32. That's El Paso Hall 32, 2 to 3 p.m. That's the Anthropology Club as well. And then 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock every Thursday. Tune in for your favorite radio show on the schedule. Oh, I'm sorry. That's how Jack described this. He was speaking personally. Yeah. A little inside baseball here before we get started. Last Thursday after the radio show, after the Bonanza season premiere, we walked out to the parking lot Y, which is appropriate for a philosophy professor to park. It should be parking lot Y, because we asked the questions. Why? And I was asking why. I was asking why my car was dead. My car would not start. No, I'm not being figurative. It literally wouldn't start. So
Wouldn't start.
A lot of people say starts hollow, wouldn't start. But I don't. Neither should you. Let me get this out of the way first. There we go. I'll be doing that quite often. So old Professor Scoggins here tried to help jump the car. It wasn't happening. Orlando graciously tried to help me jump the car as well. Wasn't happening. Both my colleague and my student have finer automobiles than myself. That was humbling. And at any rate, fortunately, AAA were able to make it happen. Very pleasant guy, but he made it work. And kind of like what we're going to do here. I'm the mechanic to your ideals.
You had to replace the whole bit. You just had to replace the battery outright, right?
Yes, pretty much. The entire battery was shot. Kind of like we're shot live via video.
Hey,
okay,
segue.
Segue. Shout out to people who attended the Phenomenology workshop yesterday. Phenomenology of memory. Wouldn't that be ironic if I couldn't remember?
Would it?
We no, it'd just be typical. It was great. We had a full course meal, food for thought, and we did have a couple of notable no-shows who registered and did not show up. Any come to mind, Orlando?
Yeah, Manzi. You weren't there. I had to take over.
Let's do a new show right now. Welcome back to Sports Talk Radio. Manzi and the Do. Manzi and Orlando.
In the do.
Dio. Anyhow, I like that moniker for us. So long story short, I'm making sure that I'll be able to leave promptly today. And in fact, I have to leave promptly in 20 minutes. I have a hard out at 3:30, as they say in the biz. I have a meeting with my associate dean and some colleagues of ours. It's going to be a good time. Unfortunately, cuts into the radio time. However, that just means we're going to bring it to you over the next 20 minutes with the utmost intensity and passion. Shout out to the following event next Wednesday. So 1 week from yesterday, folks. First installment in the Philosophy and Film series. It's called The Examined Life. I mean, hey, the Philosophy Club loves the phrase, the quotes, that the unexamined life is not worth living, according to Plato's Socrates. And, well, that begs the question, what's the examined life? Well, it was something perhaps different back then than it is today. The film, The Examined Life, will comprise 5, maybe 4 to 5, or maybe even 6 interviews, I can't recall, with currently living major philosophers. Philosophy is alive and well. There are professional philosophers out there. And so they're asking, what does the examined life look like in the 21st century? And long story short, they're going to say philosophy is in the streets. Philosophy is not something that is esoteric or abstract. It's philosophy involves things like rights, like policy, like social change, like action. No armchair philosophers today, folks. So if you're curious as to what that might mean in greater detail, come join us in Wichita Hall, 116 is the room number. Again, that's Wednesday, September 25th from 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. We'll be screening and then have subsequent discussion, free pizza, free soda waters, free popcorn. Very generous of Professor Scoggins to agree to foot the bill for all that.
What now?
So yeah, come join us. And then, of course, Philosophy Club every Tuesday. All right, shall we jump to introductions and then we can wrap up?
That's all we have time for, folks.
So we got a couple of Philosophy Club members here, of course, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. We'll start on the far end there.
Okay, my name is Saad.
Welcome. Again, is there anything you want to plug aside from the Philosophy Club and your name? Any other clubs you might be a part of, or anything that you want to promote?
I was a part of the computer science club over here at Richland. Now since I've transferred to UTD, I've been a part of the computer science club over there.
Oh,
I've
cool.
also just been a regular visitor of some of the meetings of the philosophy club over there as well.
Yes, and we love having you. You are an active discussion participant every time you're there, and I think you say some pretty insightful things. So
Thank you for having me.
yeah, glad to finally get you here. So the radio show comes and goes with guests, but sometimes we have guests that are just. Thank you. Sometimes we have guests that are maybe stalwarts at the club, but they're only on here for the first time, and I think that's you right there. Who do we have to your right?
Oh, Orlando, of course. Shout
Magic.
out to Psychology Club because I'm totally gonna ditch Philosophy Club and go there.
Can we both? Shout out to the Psych Ducks. We're considering a rebranding here at the Philosophy Club. We might call ourselves the Wonder Ducks, because as again Plato Socrates says, philosophy begins in wonder. From that late dialogue, the Theaetetus. Yes. So if philosophy begins in wonder, and we are Thunder Ducks, Wonder Ducks. Hashtag
Awesome.
Wonder Ducks.
Totally leaving.
He's like, all right, that's it. That seals it. Of course, I'm Professor Manji. Manji. I'm Manji. I'm Professor Manzi. Geez, I gotta cool up the martinis before this radio show.
Whoa.
Don't worry, they're virgin.
Just like you.
It just triggered. That's not what your mom would say. Oh, throwing shade.
Man.
Again, Philosophy Club, Philanthropology Club, co-faculty advisor. And then who do I got to my right here?
I'm Professor Kalen Scoggins. I'm a faculty member in the government department here at Richland. And, long-time interferer with the Philosophy Club.
Yeah, he's our gadfly.
That's what I do.
All right, and so the topic now, I think I might have misunderstood what the topic was before, because I realized when I got to the Philosophy Club and I kind of started riffing on the topic, I turned around and realized there was something different written on the board. So that tends to happen from time to time. So the discussion was ultimately, what is the impact of philosophy on Western civilization? I think that's ultimately what we discussed.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's what it was. I think we erased part of the question
Yeah,
to
exactly.
make it more broad.
Okay, now I see. That makes sense. And again, if I'm not McBacon, that is probably why we did that.
Francis McBacon.
Extra cheeses? Anyways,
Cheese. Is it real cheese? The light's on fire.
go vegan or go home.
What is real cheese?
It's the thing I eat most of all. Okay, so I guess we've got about 90 seconds left. Let's get into it. What's Kalen's trying to hide from behind the monitor. You're a part of this show whether you want to be or not.
I know. It's out there forever.
So I guess, requack. So the Requack is a segment where we recap, and we're Thunder Ducks, so we requack. We requack the conversation as it went down, and then attempt to extend it into uncharted territories. So I mean, in y'all's opinion, and you guys were again very actively participatory in the discussion. Were there any points that you kind of wanted to return to, maybe now, and provide a little bit of recapping context? Kind of, I guess we're going to merge the requack into the actual radio discussion due to time constraints.
Don't remember, honestly.
Well, because something that came up was again, what is philosophy, or what is the role of philosophy relative to furthering a tradition or critiquing a tradition? And I emphasized this idea that philosophy is inherently responsive or reactionary. So to say it always comes second. So first you have a status quo, and then you have somebody to question it. So, and then that critique may in turn become a tradition, which may in turn offer the need for further critique, and on we go.
And off of that, we kind of played with the idea of individualism versus communalism.
Yes, that's
if
true.
I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and just do socialism versus
McBacon.
capitalism. There you go.
Yeah, there we go.
Go ahead.
Let's. All right. Well, moment we've all been waiting for.
Non sequitur show, right?
Yeah, pretty much. That's every show. Well, yeah. So, I wanted to ask you guys. I'll get the ball rolling a little bit here, because we're kind of again, as I said, we're recapping. It seemed like the question was, at first, I should say the discussion was based around what is Western civilization, or what is it to be Western. And then at a certain point, I said, well, let's flip the script, so to speak. Let's question what philosophy is, and then see how that works itself out in particular civilizations. And I think the problem was we were kind of running into issues over what defines Western culture. Is it merely geographical, as it was perhaps the case historically, or now thanks to the sort of the globalization, thanks to technology, maybe Western civilization isn't necessarily geographically located. It's more a sense of ideas or ideals or values and customs. And again, the challenge is philosophy, and this was of a piece with last week's meeting, is philosophy in some way sort of encouraging rational refinement or greater precision and clarity and justifications for holding certain ideas or rituals and cultures and traditions in the name of quote-unquote progress or, again, evolution? Or is philosophy simply furthering permutations and deviations, but not necessarily, improvement?
Well, I'd like to try to take a stab at that.
Yeah, please.
So, as far as defining philosophy, I would say that I read a little bit. I remember reading a little bit about Pythagoras and how he was. I don't remember if he was. People say he was the first one to ever use the word philosophy or philosopher. But I remember an analogy that I read in a philosophy book that Pythagoras gave, and he said that philosophers are much like in the Greek world. You had colosseums, right, and you had spectators who would come to watch the game or the gladiating matches or whatever the sports events. They were the people who participated in the actual sport, and then there were the merchants who came and sold their merchandise, and then there were the spectators. Now, Pythagoras, if I remember correctly, related the philosopher to the spectators of the game. They didn't really gain anything as the merchants did from money or anything. They're just there to watch or observe. And I think that's what philosophers or philosophy really is. It's just the study of ideas. I'm not exactly certain.
So philosophy is not in the streets.
No, I think. Well, I mean, it depends, because I think that everybody, whether unconsciously or consciously, has a philosophy. They're just not maybe aware or analyzing their worldviews or ideas in that sense.
So if the spectators are the philosophers, does that mean that philosophy is just inherently passive? The spectators aren't active in the games, right?
No, they're not. But yeah, I think the main message of that analogy was that philosophers don't really get anything much in return. They don't hope for anything in return in studying their in ideas. They're not so much concerned with the immediate and the concrete. They're more concerned with the general. I think that's why philosophy sometimes is defined as the study of the most general aspects of reality, right? Whether it's epistemology, ontology, these are very general subjects. And I think that's what it is. Sometimes you can take a particular instance, or you can see something particular happening in life, and you can take that and kind of look at the bigger picture, help that make you look at the bigger picture of things. So, yeah.
Yeah, so philosophers, they like to click on JPEGs, see the bigger picture. Laugh into the mic, Kaylin.
Maybe your sign-off should be zoom in.
I like it. Yeah, and
zoom out, I guess. See the bigger picture.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, look, you said a lot right now that I think is really, all of it's worth chewing on. But let me just ask you, I guess, a general question. If philosophers don't expect to get anything out of it, why are they doing it?
Oh, okay. So maybe I understand what you're saying, because I think anyone who does philosophy has some motive for doing it. Right. Most likely they will gain some pleasure from it, right? From analyzing ideas or just thinking about things. They'll obviously derive some pleasure for it, and that's the impetus, the reason for why they're doing philosophy in the first place. I guess what I mean is that they don't get anything concrete, most likely, in return for it, right? Some financial, remuneration or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I get paid.
Yeah, I mean, but
he's like, yeah, but you're no philosopher.
But that's exactly yeah.
He said exactly. That's right.
Yeah, and then he said exactly. Oh, I didn't do the drops. Oh, I'm going to do that next time.
Which means ipso facto, you're not a philosopher because you get paid.
Are you speaking Pig Latin? Anyways.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. Is that everybody really is a philosopher because they have a philosophy. All it matters is to what extent are they practicing their philosophy.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, but what you say reminds me of something that, again, Socrates said. He said, actually, I'm sorry, this might be Xenophon Socrates, in fact. He says, what I hope to get out of a conversation is not, again, monetary wealth or anything like that. I hope to get a good friend. Mm-hmm. So when you have philosophical conversations, there's a sort of sharing of your soul, because you're talking about things that are, again, deep and fundamental and philosophical. And also, again, if you consider Platonic metaphysics, that's what you truly are. Your soul is your rationality in a lot of ways. And so when you're talking about deep things and you're really pushing your rationality to its abstract conceptual boundaries, you're being as fully human as you can. And when you do that in tandem with like-minded individuals, or maybe not even like-minded individuals, but individuals who care enough to consider the topic at hand authentically, that's arguably one of the most enriching experiences a human can possibly partake in. So I mean, yeah, nothing concrete necessarily, like I don't know, a new car,
new battery,
a new battery.
It actually just brings something to mind, because I remember reading a little while ago about Euclid, the famous mathematician from Greece.
What'd you call me?
Euclid. So he was probably the most famous ancient mathematician. Particularly his specialty was geometry, and so one of his students one time came to him and asked him, he said, what will I gain from learning this geometry? Because the geometry that Euclid taught, it was derived from the Egyptians, but the Egyptians had always used their geometry for some practical purpose. They always applied it to build pyramids or things like that. But what Thales did, and what later on Euclid would do, is they would take geometry, but they would develop it. So you wouldn't actually have some practical application for it. It would just be theoretical, And
for its own sake, almost.
For its own sake. And so one of his students came to him and asked him, what will I gain from this? And Euclid told him, he said, give him, I forgot what the currency he used, but 3 pence, for he must gain from what he learns. He was basically saying
wow,
that,
I never heard that story, actually.
So, yeah, I think it's the Greeks. One of the great attributes of the Greeks is that they basically learned for the sake of learning, or sought knowledge for the sake of gaining knowledge, not necessarily for to apply it to something or to solve some immediate problem.
Yeah, and I hear this a lot. Knowledge for its own sake. I'll be honest with you; it's never made any sense to me. And I've been being real here, and we've had this conversation before privately. Kalen doesn't feel the same way, I don't think. But
You made me think about it more.
yeah. Okay, well, that's good. That's what I'm here for. Give him his 3 pence. No, it's I say that because even in saying knowledge for its own sake, it's giving you some sort of purpose. It's a manifestation of a value you've chosen and you're pursuing, and in a way that is arguably fulfilling. And you're trying to live a life that's fulfilling and enriching. It seems as though philosophy gives that to you. Like knowledge for its own sake. I don't even think that's actually a possibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Does it make dollars?
I understand what you're saying, but
Orlando, stop talking.
I mean, I'm right now. Currently, I'm reading a book by I don't know if you've heard, but he's a very famous Islamic theologian called Imam al-Ghazali.
No.
He's so. If I could tell you a little bit about who Imam Ghazali was,
I was directing the question to me, Ken.
he was. He lived during the, I would say, Middle Ages. So he was before Thomas Aquinas and even before Maimonides. 100 years, I would say, before Maimonides.
Very influential in natural theology, I believe.
Yeah, he was. He studied Aristotle, and basically what he wanted to do was, at that time in the Islamic world, there was a lot of great influence from Greece and ideas from the Hellenistic world creeping in. And so the Islamic philosophers at that time began to imbibe those ideas. But Imam Ghazali, he thought, he perceived this Hellenistic influence as being corrosive to the Islamic faith. And so what he did was he wanted to refute these ideas. And for him, one of the biggest problems with Greek philosophy was that it delved too much into the abstract and the theoretical, and this is the point that this is the reason why he was mainly opposed to it. And for him, the only philosophical subjects that were worthy of pursuing were, I think, logic, linguistics, and then he said the medicine was also, which was a natural philosophy at that time. Medicine was the only thing. Why? Because these things, they benefited you and they benefited the society around you. Whereas certain other things that the Greeks were doing, it went so far out that they hardly benefited the people around them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, case in point, with somebody like Socrates, who was, again, put to death, charges of corrupting the youth. But one of a piece of that charge is that this guy's been here for 70 years. He's never had a job. Like, he's not contributing anything to society. He's just sponging off us. Yeah. So that's really fascinating. I honestly, I'm not that familiar with the sort of Hellenistic reception of things in Islamic philosophy. So that was really interesting. Sadly, it's 3:30 and I'm already late for a meeting. But what do you guys want? Do you want to continue talking? Look, I would love to continue talking. I think we're kind of just getting into something that's going to be pretty incredible. But what do you guys think? Should we wrap up early, or do you guys want to continue the conversation? Do you want to host, Orlando?
Huh? Oh, I was totally awake. No, I'm sorry.
It doesn't really matter to me whether we wrap up early or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were enjoying yourself, but I guess you don't care.
No.
Joking.
Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, listen, I guess do you want to just wrap up? It's up to you guys. I mean, you guys are having a good conversation. I don't have to be here for the episode.
Well, Orlando, would you want to continue or like?
Yeah, I can try my best to
right.
to host.
Have fun. I got to go too.
Jump in the driver's seat. Yeah.
All right, it's not as much energy, but try our best. Okay, let me go. Let's switch. Let's see.
Yeah, but you guys always have a good back and forth, even in the club. So I think this will translate well. Ladies and gentlemen, think about it. Professor Manzi signing off. Handing it over to the co-pilot here.
Manzi leaving is good for its own sake.
You sound like my parents. Okay, here we go.
Like your parents? No. Okay, let's see.
Yeah, it's like we're swapping out. You can stay there. It might be easier. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're Whoa,
Jack. They're gonna keep it going.
All right, well, the mics are on.
We'll try our best here.
Hot mic.
Let's see. Let's go. Okay, everyone. I'm taking over. Orlando. So now I'm the advisor, taking Manzi's position. I'm now the philosophy professor. All right, guys. All right. Bye. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and pick off where we left off there. So, you were talking about the Hellenistic perspective or the reception. So, what was the last thing you said? I'm so sorry.
Oh, I was just talking about how there was a reaction in the medieval Islamic world to some of the ideas that were imported from classical Greek philosophy, and how there were some Muslim philosophers such as Avicenna and Averroes who adopted some of the ideas or the approaches of Greek philosophy, and they kind of combined that with their Islamic theology. And on the other hand, there was a group of scholars like Ghazali and others who, how should I say, looked down or frowned upon this combining of views. So yeah, that's what I was talking about.
So based off that, what's your opinion on this? Would you say that, I guess you could say, the abstract, is it something that is worth exploring, or is it something, or should we only ever chase the practical applications?
Yeah, I can't really, I mean, this is something I have thought about a lot, and it's confused me quite a bit because I can really see advantages to both sides. I can understand why someone might say that anything, the pursuit of something that does not give benefit to yourself or the others around you is useless. I can understand why they would say that, and it sounds perfectly reasonable. But on the other hand, the pursuit or the study of something sort of that people may normally consider removed from reality, that you can't, maybe the benefit of that is not perceived currently or is not manifested currently, but you never know how that may turn out in the future, whether maybe your study of something could benefit people in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like also it kind of depends on how much you can actually expand on that accurately. To give an example, a lot of the pre-Socratic philosophy that was spoken of was basically the idea of the smallest component of life. And that's actually, when they spoke of that, they were speaking on something like subatomic particles. Like, that was the idea of essentially this atomic idea that essentially we are all composed of these small components, is that was so long ago, that was pre-Socratic, and yet that was something that was proven through science, and that was given the idea that we were actually able to identify that, and so imagine what could have happened if somehow, some way they were able to expand on that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example, because at that time, I don't know who, I think it was Democritus, who basically what you're talking about, how his theory was that there are indivisible particles that are so small and fundamental, beyond which there's nothing really smaller. At that time, his idea, it really wouldn't, you could study that idea at that time, but you really wouldn't know what to do with it other than, okay, that's true.
Exactly.
But now, with the so much advancements of science and technology, knowing that we're able to do so much to benefit society.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, I don't know how much it actually benefited, like splitting of the atom and then atomic bomb and so on and so
obviously,
forth.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just because of humanity. That's not necessarily because of science. But no, it's very interesting.
But then, you have the bad side of that, but then you have the good side, which is electron microscopes, which allows us, for medicine and diseases and things like that.
Exactly. And so then that also makes you wonder, well, like, we're kind of switching, just to switch gears here. Is it, like, in present day, do you believe that we have the wisdom to match the capacity of our technology? A good example for this, I would say maybe even like artificial intelligence. Like with this field is expanding at such an exponential rate. Do you think that that's something that we're ready for?
That's a good question, and I think that it's very difficult to predict whether a certain advancement, whether it's AI or something else, whether or not it will turn out bad for us, because most of the time, when things do turn out bad for humans, we tend to look at it in hindsight, in retrospect, and we think, what could we have done better? We didn't have enough knowledge, or we didn't pursue this wisely. Yeah, so I think it's very hard to answer. I'm not sure one way or the other if we're ready for
I
or not.
understand. Yeah, and so I basically am just bringing that idea up just because it's kind of funny imagining of thinking in the abstract, especially when we don't have the technology to support it. I think it's something that in some ways is necessary, because if we essentially have this new idea that we come up with, that we bring into life, and we have yet to have spoken about like the morality associated with it, we're essentially going to be confronted with new conflicts and new situations that we weren't really prepared for, and it's going to be almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
And so with that being the case, I feel like that kind of poses a sort of threat, a sort of danger of the repercussions. And so do you think that throughout humanity it's always just been instantaneous, or do you think it's always been maybe something premeditated?
You're talking about the effect of...
So but I guess essentially the morality associated with kind of a technology.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would say that, as with technology advancing, I would say it's premeditated to a certain extent, because, when as newer technologies were coming out, there were a number of people that were against newer technology. They're called Luddites, people who don't like technology. And there's always been a reactionary element in society to new things, right? Just be very wary of newer forms of technology, newer ways of doing things. I think that, to be honest, we like us, we are having a discussion on this topic, and I think there are philosophy clubs that have questions like very common questions like stem cell research and the ethics of that, or many different things. And I think that the fact that we're talking about it just shows that we're wary. We're not just jumping into something like this, right? This kind of debate is happening at very high levels. In academic journals, there are academic journal articles that talk about the very same thing that we're talking about.
Yeah. And so given that case, I guess that's something where you can say, well, I guess it is necessary for the abstract to be spoken of.
Yeah.
Because it's things that we have yet to touch, but essentially it's preparing us for it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's very interesting. Honestly, I don't even remember how we got into the conversation of the abstract. But no, that's really interesting. Just to go back to the topic of the Western civilization, like kind of the idea of individualism versus communalism. I just want to get like someone else's kind of perspective on this. What would you say is a society that's more, I guess, efficient? Would you say that it's a communal society or individualistic society?
This one, I actually have a very strong stance. So I believe it's communal, not individual. And I've come to this stance mainly because it's interesting you asked that question, because it's something that I've been doing research on.
Wow.
Just started doing research on for the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
Mainly because of a book I read.
Awesome.
A book which I originally read in high school, but I'm rereading it now. I don't know if you've read it. It's called The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
By F.
awesome,
Scott Fitzgerald. It's
awesome.
a really good book.
It's a good book. For sure.
And that book, it's interesting because when you read that book, you kind of get the feeling, and obviously this is the author's intention, but when you read it, you have a very strong feeling that the author is critiquing capitalism and favoring socialism, in that book, because of, just look at, the plot takes place in the 1920s, the Roaring '20s. There's a lot of decadence. There was a lot of, class divisions are portrayed, sharp class divisions between the poor and the rich. And everyone, there's, greed is
it's prevalent.
Yeah, it's prevalent.
So, I agree with you on these standpoints, and it's kind of interesting that you pointed that out as well, because I've kind of been leaning more towards that side of socialism, but just having conversations with other people who have like a capitalistic ideology, I kind of start to come to the realization, well, is it really the system or is it human nature? Because I feel like in its entirety, both of these systems are meant to work. but it's always human nature that kind of corrupts it. You know, with communism, you just have a bigger danger because you have one person, you have one power that essentially is just it's a, you know, I guess you call it a dictator, and so essentially it's much more dangerous because the power distribution is so sort of focused on one point.
Yeah.
But with capitalism, the distribution of power is so, I guess you could say, convoluted to the extent that even if there is corruption involved, some people will still remain free.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I feel like that maybe you're conflating democracy with capitalism and totalitarianism with socialism, because I think socialism and capitalism, strictly speaking of them as just economic ideologies, and that's really the only way I look at it. I'm not talking about like how, you know, Russia was communist and what happened under Stalin and things like that.
Yeah,
you know,
no, I understand.
That's not the socialism
No,
I'm
I get
talking.
you.
Yeah,
I get you.
and you know, what I mean by socialism is merely, you know, well, you know, it's defined formally as the collective ownership of the means of production, but I'm talking about how social welfare programs that are under a socialist system, for example, you know, when we talk about free education, or we talk about you know, universal health care and these kind of things, under a socialist system, these are the kinds of things that would, you know, belong in a socialist system. So in that sense, that's what I mean when I say social. But in capitalism, you know, we talked about the other day in the philosophy club, and I think someone mentioned individualism. Capitalism is more individualism. That's something that I do take a little bit of, that I'm a little against, because you know, human beings are social creatures. We live in societies, and so I just think that how can it not be intuitive that socialism, you know, living in society and social, is the right thing.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, definitely. Like, I've kind of, like I said, I've leaned more towards that position. But just to kind of play devil's advocate, just looking at capitalism as an entirety, it kind of is in its nature communal, you know? It's more of a mixed thing. It seems like, you know, just going back to the ideas of John Locke, which, you know, is very heavy, you know, affiliated with the Constitution and whatnot. And so going back to his ideas, that is we're sort of... we're not obligated to participate within our society, but rather it's like we ought to. And so that very ideology is like it gives you freedom, but at the same time it's a communal sense that you should have behind, associated with you as well. So I see that as, okay, well, essentially that will restrict the government from having so much control over your life, but at the same time you ought to be a part of the community. And that being associated with essentially the dangers of human corruption and the dangers that they play, that essentially if one power is focused in one point and they can have that total control, then you have that less of a danger in capitalism.
Oh yeah, that's actually a really good analysis of capitalism. One of the great points of capitalism is the freedom that it provides. And I do agree. Certainly under capitalism, an individual has much more freedom. But when you look at it deeper, you just begin to ask, is that freedom really real? Because, okay, under a capitalist system, I think it's inherent in the capitalist system that there would be class divisions. I think, you know, when you have such a big gap in wealth and when education, you know, is not free, it becomes a lot harder for people on the lower class to get that education and to use that education to, you know, utilize their freedom. The best way to use your freedom, right?
Yeah.
Don't you your options become very limited, you know, in that sense. But under a socialist system, when at least your basic necessities are taken care of, you have the freedom. You're not so much concerned with trying to find the basic necessities that you need in your life. You have the freedom now because you're not so much worried. You're not worried about that. That's taken care of by society. Yeah. Right. Now you have the freedom to pursue other things. More time to do other things. You know.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. And so just to dwell more into that, so the way I've always seen it is that capitalism is kind of not a starting point, but it's a point. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with Karl Marx's ideas of like economic systems or social systems. I forgot which one it was. But you know, essentially, it's a certain process that from capitalism, it seems that we will transition to socialism and then on to communism. You know, and I kind of agree with that. But it's not necessarily a shift in an economic system, but rather a social shift. Shift. As people, we will essentially grow closer, and with less turmoil, we will become more communal in our nature. And with that being the case, then I feel like that would be the only time when a social system like that could exist. But the thing is, don't you feel like it's also a nature of humanity to kind of always resist something that's something that's been like a tradition, like a tradition, like it's always there's always a certain resistance. So wouldn't you feel that even within a social system like that, do you feel like resistance would still exist, or would it just be human nature to be communal?
I would say there would be resistance, but then again, that resistance would probably be coming from those who are already benefiting from the capitalist system. Whereas it's quite obvious that if you're not benefiting under, no matter what system it is, whether it's communism, socialism, capitalism, if you're not benefiting under it, you would definitely want to change, because you know that change will benefit you, right?
Yeah.
So like in this country, whether it's in this country, I read there was a poll I saw where that 51% of American people, would prefer socialism over capitalism, and that to me was not really that much of a surprise, because, the wealth disparity, I think it always comes to mind, again and again. So I don't think there would be much of a resistance to it as from the people who are suffering under the system, but from the very powerful. Those who are affluent, those who are not really suffering under it, they would be the most powerful impediment to change.
Yeah. And so if that is the case, then it kind of makes you wonder, could that ever be achieved? Could it ever come a time that we will be communal in that nature? I've always told people, it seems like it would have to take an evolution of humanity.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so that's why it just makes me wonder, because of this turmoil and because of this division, could we ever reach that? And who knows?
Yeah, that's true.
Man, it's pretty crazy. And I just think it's very interesting, though, because capitalism, there's so many good sides to it, but then there's so many bad sides to it as well. I kind of just want to touch on something else right before, because we have like 10 minutes. And it's just the nature of media, and the way that kind of like the capitalistic nature of media kind of affects its society. Things like advertisements,
definitely,
even things like propaganda. They push a certain narrative from like an authoritative standpoint onto the people, like, oh, you should like this, you should like that, And so it makes me feel like, to what extent are our likes and our opinions really us, and to what extent is it our government?
Yeah, I mean, that's very true, because what we see, the advertisements, the news we hear in the news media, it does affect us, even if we are, because to the most, it does affect us subconsciously.
Definitely,
because in our subconscious, when we read Freud, how important the subconscious is in driving our behaviors and things like that. So yeah, I mean, advertisements, I'm not sure, I've only lived in the United States, so I can't really say how it's like in other places, but the advertisements really are everywhere.
Exactly.
Whether you're on the computer or on the websites, on television, they're just coming on,
Even at gas stations, man. I was putting gas the other day. They have like a whole screen there with a bunch of advertisements playing. I'm like, wow, okay.
And a lot of these advertisements are, they tend to be, I'll probably use the word non-wholesome,
Exactly.
Whether, for beer or, inappropriate, things like that. And I do what you mentioned, because it's interesting, because it just brings to mind a quote I read from somebody who says, you can always tell the ideals of a nation by its advertisements,
Nice.
And there's a lot of like beer commercials and things like that in the United States, which
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it just makes me wonder, it's kind of like an idea of the chicken and the egg, like what came first? Is it, what came first with us? Are these advertisements, or rather these social norms, a reflection of our own likes and wants, or is it something that's kind of being forced upon us?
I think it's something being forced upon us, because, look, these advertisements, they're by companies who want to sell their products, they want to make money. And even if that may not be, whether it's good for the health of people, but, in the mind of the business person is just profit, right? Isn't that capitalism really is defined as an investment with the purpose of making some profit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's really it. It's not so much the public interest is not so much in mind as much as if you can convince the public that they want this product or they need it, you know, and to make it as appealing as possible, and then that way you just make more profit, and you know.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and so I agree with you, and it's kind of funny just to see how like these economic systems really have a socio-economic effect.
yeah.
You know, is that through capitalism, it's kind of we have come to be something else. Like we kind of are the child, we're the birth of it. You know, there's like it kind of makes me. I've always wondered this. You know, through progress, you know, is competition necessary for progress? Because if we're thinking about what competition is, it's the driving force of capitalism. You know, if you talk to any capitalist, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, well, it's the competition to be the best of. But then I think human greed is kind of stalls progress, though.
Yeah, it does.
Because when you take things like the pharmaceutical company and things like medicine, even, I don't want to get dicey with this, but even things like marijuana that have been shown to have certain, you know, beneficial traits to them, things like that have been stalled because of the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
And also renewable energy because of the oil companies.
Yeah.
And so then it makes you wonder, well, that whole argument just kind of goes out the window.
Yeah, it does. I mean, yeah, I would even add to that and say there's not just a socioeconomic aspect to it. There's also a psychological aspect because when you think of, okay, competition is stressed so much, and now everyone around the world because it's global capitalism. But I mean, when you think about competition, it just makes you see other people as obstacles to overcome, you know?
True.
And if that's the kind of mindset that it gives people,
Yeah.
this system, you know? Yeah, that's
And
what I
so,
think.
but you know what's so funny though, is that we've been speaking on this, and people are probably, or anybody listening at all, might think, oh, well, they kind of gone on topic. Well, I'm kind of tie this back now. It's this idea of capitalism and this individualism is kind of the Western philosophy, I guess you could say, is kind of the focus of just the United States in general. And if you're going to ask yourself, well, how has it affected the rest of the world? Well, essentially, when we're talking about the economy as a whole, there is a capitalistic nature to the entirety of the economy, no matter if you're a social, you're a social state or not. You know, is that if you don't have a capitalist nature within your economy, you're not going to thrive.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I agree because I don't think anywhere in there's a single country in the world that is completely capitalist or completely socialist. There are elements to both in every country, but it's what is more, you know?
Exactly.
You're either more socialist or more capitalist, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And even when we look at, I think somebody brought up the example, which was perfect. When we look at China, they have a more, their structure is more social, more communal in its nature, but in its economy is still very heavy capitalist.
That's true.
And so it's just kind of funny, but we kind of wonder here, and now is that exclusive or not necessarily exclusive, but is that specific to the Western philosophy? You know, individualism turning to capitalism.
I would say I would agree with a lot of the students from the previous philosophy club and what they said, that it is one of the defining marks of one of the distinctions between Eastern and Western philosophy is Western philosophy tends to be more individualistic. I would agree with that. Just reading history and the tradition, it has tended to be more individualistic.
Very interesting.
Because, you know, Confucianism, Buddhism, no matter what you look at, they all tend to value communalism.
For sure. And then I think you could even boil it down to, well, not even boil it down because I don't want to go and say something like that. But even when you look at the religions and you compare them, you know, not to bash any kind of religions, but like it's kind of almost monotheism. You know, if you think about what that is, it's like a focus towards one individual being, you know, that's overall. And like, this is it. This is the one being, you know. And even when you look at that, I was reading this book on cosmology, and it kind of compared the old Chinese religions to kind of the, to monotheism and the Christianity. And it was comparing how how their idea of the cosmos kind of affected their religion. That a lot of the Chinese cosmology, they like in their belief of the cosmology, they believed that the world, or rather the universe, was one moving entity that was infinite, and so they believed in many gods.
Yeah.
And then monotheism, obviously they believed in one God. They believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and so you kind of compare there that like to some extent is like there's a focus on like, okay, there's an idea of a chosen people, and then a specific of just a variety of people.
Here, yeah, I get what you're saying, but here I would be a little bit more careful because I think Christianity and Judaism, it kind of depends on how you interpret it, because I don't think that they are individualistic. I think they are also, communalistic, if that's a word.
Yeah, I agree as well.
Because, whether it's how many times in the Bible does it stress to give charity to the orphans, or give charity to the poor and to care for the orphans, and over again, these are moral obligations for Jews and Christians. But here's the thing, especially with these organized religions, I'm very careful to just make some generalization about them, because they're not monoliths, they're not one set ideology. There are strands of them, and they have oftentimes radically different ways of interpreting that,
different branches of it. So I agree completely. No, I've had many conversations with some of my friends who are Christian, but I'm not necessarily going to state that they are like, especially not contemporary Christianity, because it's very different.
It's very different.
But what I'm saying is that like kind of the foundational base of their understanding of life, because if we think about where kind of philosophy and just knowledge stems from, it was heavily based on religion. To some extent, because you could make the claim that religion was really kind of some of the first philosophy, and so that's why, like, in our very ideologies and our very foundation of knowledge is based upon like certain focus points, and religion was that. So when I spoke on the idea of like monotheism, I'm not speaking specifically in contemporary, but rather like our foundation of understanding.
Yeah.
When certain people like believed certain things that people no longer do. Yeah.
I mean, monotheism, the idea, that there's only one supreme being, it could either drive people apart, or it could unite a people, because, we're all made by the same creator. You could think of it that way. Or you can think about it, okay, we are chosen, special people with privilege or things, it really depends on how you look at it,
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah, man.
Yeah. But it's been a really good discussion, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like we got like 1 minute left, but yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I was like, oh man, let's see how this goes. But no, that was good. But anyways, guys, we have like 30 seconds and counting left. We're about to wrap it up here. Just on some closing notes, Philosophy Club 2 to 3 every Tuesday in El Paso Hall. I don't know the number. EO32, there you go. Down by the subway. Go grab yourself a sandwich, bring a sandwich for everybody else, I'd appreciate some cookies. I like double chocolate chip, go ahead and bring those through. Anyways, guys, it's been a good one. So think about it.